Did you ever wonder what it would be like to be a medieval blacksmith? Probably not. But in this video, tell you why it sucked to be a medieval blacksmith, so that you never had to be one. For those of you who have no idea what a blacksmith was or did, they were basically like the mechanics of the medieval world. They made all the tools, weapons, and other metal objects needed by everyone else. So if you wanted a new horseshoe for your horse, or a sword to fight with, or an axe to chop wood with, you would go to the blacksmith and commission them to make it for you. In exchange for their services, the blacksmiths would receive payment in either money, usually in the form of silver or gold coins, or in kind, meaning they were paid in goods and services rather than actual money. For example, in England, during the 14th century, a blacksmith was entitled to 2 weeks' worth of the iron he helped produce every year. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like a pretty sweet deal. I mean, get paid in the very material that you're helping to produce. But there is more to the story, because apparently the arrangement was always honored, and the blacksmiths frequently had to go to court to force people to live up to their end of the bargain. And they didn't just do this with the iron that they helped produce, but also with the coal and the timber that fueled their furnaces and powered their bellows. And here's why that was important. See, the fuel used by medieval blacksmiths wasn't any old kind of coal or wood. No, sir. It had to be special. See, running a blacksmith shop required a lot of energy to keep their furnaces hot enough to melt the iron, and the amount of energy produced by burning regular coal or wood just wouldn't cut it. That's why medieval blacksmiths preferred to use charcoal, which burned hotter and longer than regular wood. It's not only that, but they also needed air to blow through their bellows to help fuel the fire. And they could only do this if the bellows had animal skins stretched over them, so that air could be blown in and out of the furnace. The reason why this was such a big deal was because charcoal production and the raising of animals required a lot of land. This meant that having a blacksmith shop near a village or castle was always ideal, because they would quickly run out of both iron and the materials needed to keep their furnaces going. So where did they get their supplies? Well, oftentimes they would set up shop in the forest and move from place to place as the resources around them dwindled. So not only were medieval blacksmiths integral to the medieval economy, but they were also a vital part of its geography. But before you decide that being a traveling blacksmith sounds like an exciting life, let me tell you, it sucked to be a medieval blacksmith, and here's why. 1. The work was hard. Let's face it, being a medieval blacksmith was back-breaking work. Most of their hours were spent standing over a forge, swinging hammers, and doing other assorted tasks that required a ton of physical effort. But that was only half of it, because while the work was hard, it was also dangerous. Just ask any blacksmith from the late Middle Ages who still had a stump in their thumb or a ring finger that was missing its last joint. That's right, injuries were commonplace. In fact, a survey of English Guildhall records from the mid-1300s showed that about 27% of all accidents involved a blacksmith, and nearly 60% of those injuries resulted in death. Not exactly what we call a safe workplace today. 2. The working hours were worse. Medieval blacksmiths weren't just busy during the day. No, sir. They were expected to work at night, too. After all, they were providing a service that everyone needed, whether it was a farmer needing a new plow or a knight needing a new sword. If a customer needed something fixed, then the blacksmith was expected to drop everything and get to work, even if it was the middle of the night. There were no vacations. Unlike most jobs today, medieval blacksmiths couldn't take time off, because someone else would have to cover for them. Since the work was so labor-intensive and highly localized, finding someone to fill in was darn near impossible. So whether it was Christmas, Easter, or some other holiday, the blacksmith still had to show up to work, unless, of course, their patron gave them the day off. And this rarely happened because most patrons weren't nobles. Instead, they were usually wealthy merchants or members of the local crafts guild, meaning that the blacksmith's boss was the same guy he worked with. You know what they say about working for your friends. 4. The pay was terrible. Depending on where they lived, medieval blacksmiths could earn anywhere from 40 to 80 shillings a year. Now, remember that these guys were working long and dangerous hours, and this wage was for all of their labor. That means blacksmiths earned between 20 and 50 shillings for a 40-hour work week, which in modern terms would be about $10 an hour, and not much for the risk and the effort involved. 5. Children could work as blacksmiths. We've already mentioned that being a blacksmith was dangerous work. But it got even worse when you considered that children as young as 7 years old could legally serve as apprentices. Not only that, but they could also be put to work in the forges at night. You read that right? They were allowed to work at night. No wonder so many of them lost fingers or whole hands. 6. There was a lot of competition. During the Middle Ages, the blacksmith trade was a highly competitive one. That means there were lots of job openings, but also that there was a lot of pressure to outperform your peers. After all, there were plenty of eager apprentices ready to steal your job. And with customers having so many choices, the blacksmiths had to stay sharp and be the best, or else risk going out of business. 7. Customers could be rude. Imagine it's been a long day. You finally get home, and you collapse onto your bed only to hear a knock on the door. You open it to find a hulking knight covered head to toe in armor. And he tells you his sword is broken, and he needs you to fix it right now. That's right, customers could be rude. And not just knights, mind you, but anyone who needed something fixed. After all, the blacksmith was there to provide a service, and no matter how tired he was, he had to drop everything to make sure the customer was happy. 8. Medieval blacksmiths were often looked down upon. In medieval society, there was a strict hierarchy of occupations, and where you fell on that ladder determined your social status. At the top were, of course, the clergy and the nobility, followed by the legal and medical professions, as well as skilled traders. Below that were artisans and craftsmen, and at the bottom were laborers. And guess where the blacksmiths fell on that list? Right next to the laborers. What this meant was that they were seen as little more than manual workers who performed dirty and dangerous tasks, which they did for a pittance. 9. Becoming a medieval blacksmith was a closed shop. Not literally, of course, but you know what they say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. In medieval Europe, like in many other places throughout history, trade guilds controlled the market. And joining one was almost impossible without connections. See, trade guilds were exclusive clubs whose purpose was to protect the interests of merchants, artisans, and craftsmen within a particular industry. They did this by setting standards, regulating production, and keeping prices high. But the downside was that unless you had connections, you would never get in. And number 10, the materials were expensive. If you wanted to become a medieval blacksmith, you needed iron. Lots of it. And during the Middle Ages, iron was an expensive commodity, especially in Western Europe, where it was in short supply. As a result, the price of iron skyrocketed, making it difficult for aspiring blacksmiths to get started. And that was, many of them traveled around the countryside, doing odd jobs in exchange for food and lodging, till they could save up enough money to buy their own supplies and set up their own shop. So there you have it, 10 reasons why being a medieval blacksmith totally sucked. Of course, if you had been alive during the Middle Ages and you thought to yourself, yeah. But being a medieval blacksmith sounds like a pretty sweet gig. We've got some good news for you. Thanks for watching.